Hey, back again here. I've got a 2016 Ford F150 with a failed power steering rack. These systems unfortunately need to be programmed in as they are completely electric. It's not a hydraulic system, there's no power steering pump or fluid running through the rack itself. It's all electric. There's a motor and parts that fail inside of these units, and they'll pop various codes, most of which the end result is you have zero power steering. It's extremely hard to turn the wheel. So I'll go through the installation and using Forscan throughout this video. um, First step you'll see here, we're going to apply the e-brake just so the vehicle doesn't roll at all. Common practice, make sure it's in park. Next we're going to go ahead and jack up the vehicle. Make sure you set the jack underneath the vehicle where it can be properly lifted from. Next you'll want to put a jack stand or two underneath here just for your own safety. Alright, so this step's actually pretty important. Before you remove the steering shaft, you should always lock the steering wheel in position so that you don't rotate it by accident or otherwise. If the steering wheel is rotated while the shaft is removed, you risk the chance of damaging the clock spring, the mechanism that transfers the electricity and power and controls through the steering wheel into your steering wheel controls and the airbag, the horn, etc. So very important you lock the steering wheel in place so that you don't do that. Here I'm removing the input shaft bolt. It holds the steering shaft to the power steering rack. Make sure you remove this bolt all the way. It's a 10mm head. I found out after the fact it's a pretty straight shot in these models from the top of the engine bay, so you can probably remove that bolt easier, but removing it from below with a bar like this and gently tapping it is typically best. Just try to not have a camera in your hand at the same time. So once it's completely removed, you can move along. Now I actually went and removed these two bolts just to bring the connectors down a little bit closer so that I could hook up the other power steering rack and program it. You can set the other rack on, a block of wood, whatever, just to get it close enough to actually plug into those connectors without straining the electrical wiring. You don't want them to be taut or pulled on when you're doing this procedure. Alright, so I'm going to pause the video here and we're going to do a little programming. I'm going to show you how to use Forscan. I'm just going to do this through screenshots, so hopefully this facilitates enough information to where you can go out and do this yourself, save a crap load of money on your own diagnostics and otherwise on any given Ford or derivative Ford. So let's get started. So our first screenshot here, you're going to see a blank Forscan screen. It's just going to be, as it would be when you first boot up the program. Alright, next we're going to see the vehicles connected. After you hit this button in the very bottom left corner, it will connect up and pop up this window asking that it found a recorded profile or would you like to save this profile. If you plan on working on this car again, I would save it if it's your personal vehicle, so on and so forth. So yes or no, move forward. Push the next screenshot here. And now you'll see all the modules loaded up. You'll see in the bottom area here, the one highlighted, that's the power steering control module. It has a number of codes because we actually have a failed steering module, obviously. So we can keep pushing. What you're going to go down to is the little microchip looking icon on the left of the application. That's going to bring up the different functions that you can perform. Make sure under the configuration and programming tab instead of log. Scroll down, you'll see module configuration as built format. That's going to be one of the easiest ways to load and save the characteristics from one module to the next. So pushing forward, you'll click that, and the little bottom left there, you'll see a play indicator. You'll click that and there'll be another pop-up window that opens here. It says something to the effect that, incorrect value, written made module, that will make non-functioning and require restoring original as-built data, yada, yada, yada. This is general warnings. Just proceed through with caution. Don't do anything outside of what I explained and you should be fine. However, I will stop you right here. I am not taking any liability for any mistakes that happen or if it doesn't work out for you or otherwise. So proceed at your own risk is the summary to this. As long as you proceed as directed, you'll be fine. So moving forward, you'll hit the OK. It'll pop up this screen with a bunch of number blocks. What you're going to want to do is in the bottom, click Save All. And again, this is saving your pre-programmed module information of the power steering setup that you currently have, the old module. as it was correctly programmed into the vehicle. So click Save All and save that block into your desktop or somewhere where you'll easily find it. I think in the configuration file it's easily accessible. So after you connect the new module in, you're going to go back to this menu and actually let me stop here. So now that you've saved all these parameters into a log file, you're going to actually go back in here when you install the new module, bolt it all in, so on and so forth, connectors are into the module. You'll come back in here, same exact configuration window, or the same window you executed before for the power steering module configuration, the as-built one. You'll run that again, and then instead of saving, you'll click Load All, and then you'll load in your configuration file that you just saved and write all of those changes after the file is loaded. And what that does is makes the new module the same as the module that you took out. So you won't have any issues with your vehicle afterwards. It won't damage the steering rack. You'll be on your way. All right, you can see the two power steering racks here. We have the old and the new. I already have the new one programmed in. I just removed the old one so I could swap the outer tie rod ends over easily. One thing you really want to do before you get carried away and install this rack is you want to make sure that the rack is centered and that the steering shaft has been, aligned to center mark, and you're not going to be, one rotation one way or one rotation the other way. So very vital step. Just looking at the bellows or visually isn't often enough to verify that. So what I like doing is gently turning it, like channel locks or adjustable wrench, something that slips over the flat spot on the steering shaft so it doesn't mar it. Spin it all the way to one side while counting, spin it all the way to the other side while counting, figure out how many turns, divide it by half, turn it to the center mark. The steering shaft can only slide onto this in one location, and you can see the round little groove here. That's where the bolt that we removed earlier slides through the knuckle on the steering shaft and then pinches onto there and locks it in place. So vital, what you can do is get paint marker and mark, here to here, here to here, just so in case any of the slides or rotates, like this little dust boot can rotate, you won't actually change the position of the shaft and you will be good to go. The other aspect to the job is once you loosen this nut, count how many turns it takes to rotate these off all the way so that you can put them on essentially in the same position and the truck will be as close to aligned as possible afterwards. So yeah, we'll go ahead and crack those loose, zip them off, and go from there. So I also wanted to note that this vehicle is going to get an alignment immediately after this job is done. I highly recommend you do the same. Don't assume that your alignment will be good. You're going to eat your tires up most likely. Differences in one rod to the next will make it out of alignment. One other thing we're going to do before we put this tie rod end on is we're going to put a little caliper grease or bearing grease, just some kind of grease to keep rust at bay on these threads. That way the alignment technicians don't hate us down the road when this rusts up and the tie rod end gets stuck. Saves a lot of time. I do this on so many things. Some kind of rust prevention will go a long way. And now through the upper side of the engine bay, it's actually easier to tighten, remove, or install the upper bolt on that steering shaft, the one that connects to the rack. So right here you can see my wrench just contacting that bolt that I got to tighten. So pretty decent access right here. Make sure that's good and tight before you leave. All right, so we're just gonna go over the tools that I used on this job. It's basically, a simple toolkit. Half of what you see in front of you is not necessary, but made the job a little bit quicker, easier. So to start, impact wrench with 21mm socket to get off the wheels. Also, the 21mm socket is good for the tie rod end nut that holds it into the knuckle. Typically you'll need a puller tool or some experience smacking the side of the knuckle where the tie rod end goes in to get the tie rod to release itself. You don't want to smack on the bottom of the threads, especially not without the nut over it, otherwise you'll mangle it. But having one of these guys simplifies that. You just tighten it up with a little impact gun or even a ratchet, and eventually it'll pop itself off. If under tension this doesn't seem to want to release the tie rod end, give it a couple light smacks on the end of the push rod here or on the side of the knuckle, and that'll usually jar it free. A couple of bars. I used this long one to get off the steering shaft. It's nice to be able to just push off the edge and gently tap it with a hammer. I used this long extension which goes from 1/2 inch to 3/8 drive with a swivel socket just to get that bolt out of the steering shaft. But again, you can just use a ratchet and regular socket set. Moving on down the line, I've got a couple adjustables here and a 24mm wrench. These were all used to remove the tie rod ends. Depending on what tie rod end you have on, the sizes might change a little bit. I just use the adjustables to hold the tie rod and this one to cinch the nut, and vice versa. If your tie rods are rusted, you'll probably end up needing to use some penetrating lubricant or heat to get them to come off. But as I explained before, it's good to put some grease on the threads before reinstalling so that you don't run into that issue. All right, and the two bolts that hold the steering rack on, one is a 24mm, the other is a 21mm. So those two sockets, I used the torque wrench to install the wheels, made sure they were torqued down properly, and then And 11/16 I found was the right size to go over the steering shaft if you wanted to turn the steering rack, you know, all the way to one side and then the other to find the center like I explained previously. This would be a good tool for that. So yeah.